Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Cruise Altitude, a light-hearted look at the world of aviation from the other side of the cockpit door. I'm Si.
And I'm John.
Coming up this episode, as promised, we have something a little bit different.
So fasten your seatbelts, prepare for takeoff. It's the Cruise Altitude Homeschooling Special.
So here we are, John, still in lockdown. In the UK, schools are still closed and homeschooling is in full swing. So here at Cruise Altitude, we've taken it upon ourselves to temporarily relieve some of that homeschooling burden and have put together a mini science or maths lesson to help explain just how planes fly.
Yeah, we get so many questions, don't we? Such as, how does all that metal even get airborne? What makes a plane stay in the air? Why do planes fly so high? And how does it even get off the ground? Well, let us explain through some simple explanations and some try-at-home experiments. So here goes. Parents and guardians, sit back, relax, and let us take over the homeschooling for a little while. But listen in, because you don't want to be quizzed after by your youngsters and get caught out.
You certainly don't. So before we begin, you'll need to gather some equipment for our mini experiments. No, not a PlayStation or a Nintendo Switch, but you'll need one piece of A4 paper, a hairdryer, and a pillowcase or small towel. Right, so now we've collected all those things. Have you got yours ready, John?
I have indeed, Si. I'm all ready.
Okay, let's begin finding out how an aircraft flies. Now, John, I remember being back at flight school and being presented with something very scary one day. No, not the 14 textbooks or budget accommodation, but the lift formula. Can you remember what that is?
Yeah, of course. So give me a second. Got to get this right. It's lift equals the coefficient of lift times half the density times the velocity squared times the surface area of the wing.
Yeah. Okay.
So L equals CL times half rho V squared S.
Yeah. See, now for me, that's mega complicated. And even to this day, I'm not sure I totally understand it. So let's break it down into some little chunks and hopefully that will make understanding how planes fly a little simpler.
So there's four main things, Si, to understand to explain how a plane flies. And all those components work together and against each other. So the four components are lift, weight, thrust, and drag. And as some clever bloke once said, I think it was Einstein.
Yeah, I've heard of that bloke.
For every action, there's an equal or opposite reaction. So here we go. So the first thing on our mega complicated big equation there then was lift. So what's lift then, Si?
Well, this is really the key to what makes an aircraft fly. Most people might think it's the engines, but actually it's lift that we require.
So how do we get lift then?
Well, let's have a go at our first experiment, John. For this, you will need one piece of roughly A4 size paper and some deep breaths. Have you got that?
Bear with me. All right, I've got my paper. Yep, there we go. I'm all good.
All right, okay. So we're going to try to do this experiment and see if we can generate some lift on your piece of paper. So what I want you to do, John, is take that piece of A4 paper and hold it along the short side between your first finger and thumb on each corner.
Yep. There we go.
Right, exactly like that. Yep. So you've got two hands on a piece of paper along the short side between finger and thumb. And you're doing it so the paper basically droops down.
Yep. It's flapping in front of me.
Okay, perfect. Now take that paper and hold it close to your mouth. And what I would like you to do is to blow as strongly as you can over the top of that piece of paper. And you should see it start to rise up and become, if you've got enough breath and puff in you, horizontal. Ready to give it a go?
Yep, let's have a go.
All right.
Here we go.
Blow a bit stronger. There you go.
Ah, cool.
All right. Now, because this is an audio podcast, what you won't have seen at home there is that John had his fingers and thumbs kind of pointing down. So the paper was he was just holding it down. What he's trying to actually do now is hold it horizontal, so flat, and the paper is drooping. And now, when you blow across that piece of paper, John, what's happening?
Well, it starts to rise up.
It does. And why does that happen? Well, because by blowing the air, you're making the air move faster over the top of the paper than underneath. And this creates what is known, in big words, as a pressure differential between the top and bottom of the paper. The top side has a lower pressure and the underside remains higher. High pressure air always moves towards the low pressure, so this means the paper is in effect being sucked up by the low pressure, and this is exactly how a wing works.
Ah, cool. So this piece of paper is just like an aeroplane wing then?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at an aircraft wing, you'll see that it's normally flat underneath with a curvy top side, and this is called an aerofoil. And that curvy shape on the top makes the air flow faster than underneath as it's got further to travel effectively, which creates the pressure differential we've just witnessed with the paper. And that is essentially how the plane flies. The wing is sucked up into the air.
Okay, so the wing gets sucked into the air, but how do we create that airflow or what is basically wind over the wings?
Yeah, well, for this, we need something called thrust.
Cool, so we've seen with a piece of paper that we can create lift, but we need something called thrust. So what exactly is thrust then, Si?
Well, John, thrust is essentially the forward motion of a plane travelling through the air. It's the same as an engine that drives your car or the pedals on your bike. Thrust is really a motion of moving forwards or occasionally backwards.
So how do we create this then?
Well, on an aircraft, this is generated via the engines. So for an aircraft to fly, we need enough thrust to generate enough forward speed to create enough airflow over the wing to suck the wing up and make us fly.
Okay.
So now we can kind of see how these things start to fit together.
Yeah.
Think of your piece of paper again. Essentially, your blowing was kind of the thrust. So let's try another experiment. Let's try swapping that blowing action for a hairdryer. Now, kids, you may want to get an adult to help you out here. Let's have a look and see what happens. So, John, have you got your hairdryer ready?
I've got my piece of paper, I've got my hairdryer. Yeah, so what do I need to do?
Okay, so you might need a helping hand here, so somebody can hold the piece of paper while you blow the hairdryer across. So you're going to put the hairdryer this time near the top of the paper.
Okay.
And blow the air from the hairdryer across the top of the piece of paper and see what happens. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's give that a go. Right, I've got my piece of paper, I've got my hairdryer, put it on a nice cool setting. I don't burn my hands.
Good idea.
There we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Oh, wow.
There we go.
Wow.
So, what happened this time?
Well, that paper, well, it was really easy to get the paper going, I guess, because we've got more air coming from the hairdryer. It was blowing a lot faster than I could. And yeah, the paper really started to fly. Yeah,
look at all that thrust you've generated with that hairdryer. So, as you say, it was definitely easier to get the paper to become horizontal, wasn't it?
Yeah, to get the paper flat, much easier.
Yeah, so I guess in simple terms, we could say that the more thrust we generate, then the easier it is to get lift.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, there are a few more things we need to consider here. As we said at the start, for every action, there is an equal or opposite reaction. So you might be asking, well, we know how to generate lift and we know where thrust comes from, but how do we know how much lift we need to get the plane to take off, or how big do the engines need to be?
Well, I guess this is something for some clever aircraft design engineers, but in simple terms, we need enough lift to counteract the weight of the aircraft. So weight plays an important role here, because the heavier the aeroplane is, the more lift we need to generate, and therefore the more thrust we will need.
So is that why big aircraft have big or lots of engines?
Essentially, yeah. But it also depends on lots of other things, like how clever the design of the wing itself is, and that'll affect how much lift it generates. Also, how much thrust is generated is going to have an impact. So if you think of the experiment we've just done with a piece of paper and a hairdryer, when I blew on the piece of paper, it was reasonably easy to get the paper up to horizontal. When I used the hairdryer, it was really easy because there was so much more force coming from the hairdryer. But if we replace that piece of paper with a piece of cardboard, we'd need an even stronger hairdryer to get the piece of cardboard to rise because it's heavier.
Ah, right. So actually weight plays quite an important role here in this whole formula.
Yeah, exactly. So we can think of weight as directly proportionate to lift. Lift has got to be more than weight.
Ah, so this is where the equal or opposite comes into the whole equation.
Exactly that, Si. The heavier we are, the more lift we need to make.
Cool.
So, thinking way back to the start then, we said that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And we've learnt now that weight is opposite to lift. So I'm guessing, Si, there must be something that's opposite to thrust.
Yeah, unfortunately there is, John. And that last piece of the puzzle here is something called drag.
So unfortunately, when we generate thrust and we move forwards, we're met with some resistance. So there's something that's always trying to stop us or slow us down. And that is called drag. So drag has a direct relationship to thrust. Quite simply, the faster we fly, the more drag we get.
Yeah, the more thrust, the more drag, roughly speaking. Now, there are different types of drag, but let's consider it to be related to the surface area of the aircraft that faces the wind, to keep things simple. So, John, you ready for another experiment?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so when you put your hand out of a car window or when you're cycling a bike, the faster you go, the more force of the air against you will feel, yeah?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but we don't recommend the car test, do we?
No, of course not.
So instead, try this. Take your piece of paper again.
Yep, got my piece of paper.
And hold it above your head this time with it facing forwards.
Okay.
So hold it on each end with it kind of facing forwards.
Yep, got it.
Now, ready for some exercise?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, I want you to walk down your garden, be careful of the palm trees, and see how much resistance you feel from the air on the piece of paper. Okay, ready?
Okay, right, I'm off.
All right. There he goes, wandering down the garden, dodging the palm trees as he goes, and he's on his way back. Here he is. Right, John.
Yeah,
so
I'm back.
Yeah. How did that feel? Did you feel much resistance on the piece of paper?
Yeah, as I was walking, there's obviously something pushing against it. Yeah, a little bit.
All right. Now, how about we try that again, but this time you're going to run.
Oh, if I get my running shoes on.
Yeah. Be careful. Right, you ready?
Yeah. Here we go.
Okay.
I'm off.
John's put the piece of paper above his head again. He's holding it on each end, and he is sprinting, it's fair to say, down the garden. And he's turning around, he's on his way back, and here he is.
Right.
So, John.
I'm back.
Yeah.
That was hard work.
Not been exercising much in this lockdown, eh? Right then.
No.
So, how did that feel? Was that any different? You notice anything different?
Yeah, well, there was definitely a lot more resistance that time when I was running down the garden than there was when I was walking.
So this is drag, and the faster you run, the more resistance you feel on the paper. Now, John, I want you to try and change the paper for, what have you got there, pillowcase or a small towel? Either will do.
Yeah, I've got pillowcase.
Pillowcase.
Pillowcase,
oh, very good. Now, I want you to try the experiment again, and you should feel even more drag as you've made the surface area even bigger. So you've gone from a little piece of paper to quite a large pillowcase. So let's give it a go and see if you can feel that difference. You ready?
Yeah, here we go. Back into the garden again, yeah?
Back into the garden again.
Right, here we go.
Don't run too fast. You might take off. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Go. Oh, there he goes, running down the garden with a pillowcase. The neighbours are looking out the window with some concerned expressions, but little do they know what John is learning right now. And here he is, back at the door, and he looks slightly exhausted. Bit red-faced there, John.
It's hard work, this. I didn't know I was going to have to do it's PE as well as science.
Well, there you go. And what's interesting is it is harder work because you must have felt a lot more drag from that pillowcase.
Yeah, definitely. There was loads more.
Yeah. So this is why aircraft try to be as streamlined and as slick as possible to reduce the amount of drag and therefore thrust required.
So I guess that's why, for example, Concorde's really pointy, because then it doesn't have as much drag as it flies through the air.
Yeah, really, really streamlined, and a very kind of low amount of actual surface area of the plane basically pointing into the wind. So now we know that for a plane to fly, we need to generate more thrust than drag. But we know that as thrust increases, so does drag. And we need to create enough thrust to generate enough lift to overcome the weight of the aircraft. And that is how an aircraft flies. So hopefully now that's made that really complicated formula we had at the start a lot easier to understand. And this is certainly how I managed to understand it. So all we need to think about is lift and weight, thrust and drag. And now we can use that to answer lots of other seemingly quite complicated questions. Actually, the answers might now become a little bit simpler to understand. So John, why do planes fly so high?
Well, as you get higher up in the sky, the air becomes thinner, and therefore there's less drag.
Ah, okay.
So for the same levels of thrust, we can use the same size engines or the same size hairdryer, but because the air's thinner, less drag.
Yeah, so it's not only beneficial for the engines, so you get more movement for your thrust, but also there's less drag to slow you down and stop you from moving.
Exactly, so the aeroplane can fly even faster.
Wow, okay. So what's the difference between how a plane and a bird fly?
Well, good question. Well, birds are very similar to planes. Their wings are shaped in the same way to create low pressure above the wing and high pressure underneath it. But they also need thrust in order to move forward. But rather than engines, of course, birds flap their wings to generate it. So essentially, it's the same. It's all the same forces, lift, weight, thrust and drag, but the thrust is created just that little bit differently.
And that's why you would see a bird kind of flap its wings quite vigorously to generate some thrust and then maybe glide for a little while with those wings, which are creating that lift from the thrust they've just gained.
Yeah, because then the bird's able to store that energy and use that to move forward.
Cool. So how does a helicopter differ then?
Well, I suppose in a way it's very, very similar to an aeroplane or a bird. And like a bird, a helicopter creates its thrust in a different way. So essentially, the rotor blades on the top of the helicopter are actually mini wings or aerofoils. And as they spin around, they generate lift. And this is what enables a helicopter to take off.
Ah, okay, that's really cool. So one more question for you, John. Does the size of the plane make any difference? Does it really matter how big the plane is? Because some people will look at like a great big heavy aircraft and go, oh my gosh, how on earth does that thing get in the air? Whereas when somebody sees a really small plane in the sky, they don't really have the same thought.
Well, no, the size doesn't really make a difference. So the lift formula that we've discussed already remains the same, but the size of the forces required changes. So, for example, the world's largest airliner, the double-decker Airbus A380 Super Jumbo, well, that can take off at about 580 tonnes. So really, really heavy.
Wow, that is heavy.
Yeah, and that's going to need a lot more lift to get in the air than, say, a small little two-seater Cessna 172 that weighs about 1 tonne. So to do this, in very simple terms, the designers of the A380 made the wing bigger and they made the engines more powerful.
Okay.
But obviously the wing can't be too big or else it wouldn't fit into the airports that we have.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's lots of other really cool stuff. And without getting too complicated, it's things like the way the wing is shaped that makes it possible to get a huge Super Jumbo off the ground without it being too big for a regular sized airport.
Wow, that's really interesting, but that's all for another episode.
Yeah, exactly. It's really complicated, but I guess the thing to take away is that the lift formula stays the same, whether it's a small airplane or a huge airplane.
So there we go. What did we learn? Well, we now know that aircraft need lift to fly, and we know how this lift is generated and how weight, size and drag affect everything. So we can simply think of this as a picture. So a little bit of homeschooling homework. Find yourself that piece of paper and a pen, and if you were to draw an aeroplane side on and draw one arrow pointing up, that would be for lift. Then draw one arrow underneath pointing down, that would be for weight. If you draw one arrow pointing forwards, that would be the thrust. And one final arrow pointing backwards, that would be for drag. And there's your answer, John. So not so hard after all. What was I ever so scared about on that first day of flight school?
Exactly.
And if you have drawn that picture, why not colour it in, jazz it up and send it in to us via our social media platforms. We'd absolutely love to see them and see how you all got on with your experiments.
So there we go. That's it for our first ever homeschooling special. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly learned some things along the way, didn't we, Si?
We certainly did.
Well, if you liked the episode, please share it around and don't forget to get in touch with us and let us know what you thought. We love hearing from you, and you can do that via our various social media platforms. That's Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can email us at cruisealtitude@outlook.com, or of course you can log on to the website cruisealtitude.com. We'll be back next time with all our usual features and segments, plus we'll have the return of the mailbag.
Thanks for listening. For now, keep it down to earth with Cruise Altitude.
Thanks for listening to Cruise Altitude. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast provider, leave us a review and get in touch via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Links can be found over on our website, cruisealtitude.com. A down-to-earth podcast from Cruise Altitude.